Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Kurt Leavins and Kevin McCurdy. Welcome, guys.
Thanks. Hello, hello.
Hello. Today we're here to talk about, we're here to talk about Bruce McCurdy. So we're just going to have, our usual format is two good things, two bad things, and two numbers. Today we're going to have probably a mishmash of
a million good things, no bad things,
and million good things, no bad things, and a few numbers. Probably a little bit of weeping. You never know. All right. I'll just start it off just with a brief summary of Bruce's life. He was born in Newfoundland, came to Alberta as a young person with his father. His father was an educator here in the province. Bruce worked as a banker for 20 years at CIBC. He was an astronomer at the TELUS World of Science and the planetarium there. And for 15 years, and this is how people know him best, I think, at least people listening to this podcast, he was a writer for the Cult of Hockey. And about 10 years ago, we started this podcast. So, and it has been most regularly after every single game. We've done a podcast all those years. And Bruce, completionist and fanatic that he was, even when I was missing, like he was going to be doing that podcast. So you two often were on the podcast with Bruce when I was not here. And did I ever love that in Bruce? He was so conscientious, but it was beyond conscientiousness with Bruce, which is another quality that I liked. So anyway, let's start it off with why don't we start it off, Kurt, with your first good thing about Bruce?
Sure. Boy, we could be here all day. But I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want to talk about Bruce McCurdy, the journalist. And the reason I want to do that is because both David and I are trained journalists. Readers and listeners of the Cult of Hockey may or may not know that, but it's the day job for both of us. David in print, me in broadcast. I've been doing this for going on 38 years now. But we were taught how to do this, and have practiced it for decades. And notwithstanding how people may feel about our abilities in our chosen field, this is something that we do for a living. And I say that just to draw context because Bruce wasn't. Yet he consistently and frequently displayed all of the best assets and traits that a great journalist does. And I'd like to specifically point out that I thought Bruce was a particularly sharp reporter. In the world of journalism, we're often divided up into commentators and reporters. And I think it's fair to say that both David and I frequently lapse into commentator mode. It's just but Bruce was so many things that so many young journalists strive to be. First and foremost, his accuracy was uncanny. Nothing mattered much more to Bruce in my interactions with him than accuracy, facts, and proper context. And when I would write an article which I thought would be, complete and double checked and triple checked and everything, Bruce, in his own very friendly way, he was never pushy or angry about it. He would always just very matter-of-factly say, hey, you said his goals against average in 1983 was 2.16. It was actually 2.15. It was very Spockian, right? But as someone who's made his living and fed his family as a journalist, I really deeply appreciated that in him. One, that he gave a damn about facts every time, consistently. But two, that he handled it in the way that he did. He didn't hit you over the head with it, nor did he soft lob it to you. He would just very, solid post as always, Kurt. Paragraph 6, you've dropped the so-and-so. And there'd be the list. And me being me, there was always a list of things. So facts was the one thing. But his incredible and almost unequaled, in my experience, sense of fairness with how he conducted himself. And I think that's why often we got facts rather than opinion from Bruce, because I think, like any good reporter, his work was based and embedded upon facts. And to the point where if he ever felt something lean one way or the other, he would gently but factually point that out. And in my experience, would give me the opportunity to A, recognize that, and B, if I so choose, I could adjust. And these were traits that I often marveled at, because here's a guy who was a banker, an astronomer, a father, and here he was practicing the art that I had trained to do all my life, and often did it better than me. Which was equal parts admiration and maddening. Maddening because I hadn't lived up to my own standards sometimes, but admirable in that he was able to seemingly so naturally adapt to something that he hadn't been formally trained in. And I think that just spoke to his high level of intelligence and adaptability and thoughtfulness. Ours, even though it's not always respected, is a tough gig. Journalism isn't an easy job, and everybody always has lots of opinions on whether you do it well or not. But in his case, I thought he executed the art amazingly and consistently well. And so, as I say, I just thought that, as someone who this wasn't his A thing, he was really good at it, and I found that something that was easy to admire.
Kevin?
I guess extending the concept of fairness, I think my dad was unrivaled in his ability to find a common ground with people, and you sort of alluded to this already, but I want to expand upon it. And he had an innate ability to be a peacemaker. It didn't matter who you were. He had years and years and years to hone this skill set at the observatory and other places, venues, long before even I was born. But his ability to connect with people on some aspect. He may not have agreed with everybody on everything that they said, but he was able to find some common footing. Whether it was hockey, whether it was astronomy, whether it was somewhat rarely politics, whether it was whatever, he was able to get an innate ability to seek out that, what interests you, and then build on that to build a relationship with people. And it made him incredibly successful in his field of journalism. And it made him successful in life, as far as I'm concerned. He wasn't a divisive person. He tried to find neutrality and reasonableness, when in my own mind, sometimes, he would remind me that there's alternative viewpoints, and that there are, you need to think bigger than whatever your heart is telling you or whatever your brain is telling you. You need to consider both those things. And I actually want to read a passage from an interview from him. Credit to Johnny Willis for digging this up. Another, Cult of Hockey alumni of very high regard. Um, if you find your heart and your head on the same page, write on that page. When they are not in full agreement, take the time to explore both sides of the issue and try to present a balanced view. And I think, like, I don't think you could summarize my father any better than that statement, because balanced views are what he did better than anybody I know. And I'm deeply going to miss that innate ability to look beyond the reaction and look beyond the feels to reasonable and scientific method, I guess.
That is such a fantastic quote from Bruce, and I'm glad that John found that. I didn't know it was that John found it, but that was a great find because it really does sum him up. He was. I made this point before. He was in many ways the goalie, cleaning up the messes that Kurt and I would sometimes create.
Indeed.
In terms of our graphs, like just last week, again, he cleaned. Like I had a graph that was. I had Brett Kulak's time on ice wrong. I had done some mathematical error, and he spotted it immediately, and I was able to correct it, thankfully. And Bruce, this happened 2 or 3 times a year where I would do some graph and, make some basic error, and he would notice it. Yeah. It's interesting because I think what the internet has done is journalists, in many ways, came from a similar group of people, from my experience, and they were agents of people who saw themselves as agents of change, and they wanted social change, and they became journalists because of that. It was a huge movement, possibly related to Watergate. Maybe it's always been the case in journalism, but the journalists, and they're not necessarily great at numbers or scientific training or analytical thinking. And what the internet has done is opened up writing and the platforms, public spaces, to people with all kinds of different skills. So if you think about it, Bruce had skills, training as a banker, training as a scientist, and what does that background teach you? It teaches you well to be careful, look at the numbers, be cautious, be balanced, be accurate as a banker. Like you're going to lose your job if you're not accurate.
He worked for audit, hey? Like that was one of the jobs he did for CIBC, is he would fly around the country and, into the remote branches and actually do their audits. So his job was a number matcher.
Yeah, how does that not surprise me?
That was, if you want to know where, I'm not sure he enjoyed the dollars and cents aspect of it, but from a pure, numbers point of view, that's where a lot of his experience would have been. So, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but
that's okay. No, that is a good point, and that is the point I'm making here. Like he had a unique skill set, talent stack, mm-hmm. which really lent itself well to journalism, and frankly, it's a talent stack that many journalists are missing, and to some extent, Kurt and I are both missing. I mean, my number sense comes from growing up reading Bill James and being enamored with hockey numbers, statistical numbers.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go much further than that. Whereas Bruce, like again, I think it was more of a way of life, and it was something that he had done for many years, and wrote scientific papers. And you have to be careful, and you have to have all your facts in order to do that. See, and at the Cult of Hockey, when I was looking, initially I just did it all on my own, and it was way too much work. And I was looking for people who could come in and help me with this. But there had to be a certain amount of trust, because we're publishing at all times, and there's not always time for an editor to go over it. You can't listen. As much as I love all the boiling, roiling, frothing oligosphere, there's people have just wild opinions all the time there, and they're angry, and they're too angry, and they're reading the minds of the GM. They're saying things that they don't know. They're spreading crazy rumors all the time, and I needed people who were trustworthy, that I could trust, could go in and write a piece, and without an editor looking over their shoulder, aren't going to get us sued. Journalism's a serious business. Anything you say in public, you can get sued. And when you write for the Edmonton Journal, that's the big company getting sued. So people just firing away on Twitter, they don't understand. They can get sued. Some of them have been sued. And, you know, as a young journalist, this was the thing for me to understand is like everything I write that's going in the paper, you got to be careful. And Canadian libel laws are super strict. Anyway, Bruce, I never had to worry about Bruce or Kurt because of it wasn't just something that they knew, it was something that they respected. They wanted to be fair to people. They want to be accurate. They want to be fair. And it's how I think how we actually all gravitated towards each other on the internet is because whereas other people were super quick to judge everything, all three of us were restrained in our judgments of management, of coaches, and of players consistently. And it kind of it made us, you know, people would call us Oilers apologists, this, that, and the other thing. But fair enough. But that's just how we're wired, is to be fair to other people. And it took me a long time to get there, to be there. And I'm still not always in that spot. But it is something that I admire. And Bruce had it in spades, and so do you, Kurt.
Thank you kindly.
It got to Bruce is fascinating because, like, even on something like the arena, which was a huge debate on the blogosphere, on the internet, and it wasn't just it was acutely related to the future of the Oilers. It had a real hockey context to it, in that if the Oilers weren't financially sound, they couldn't keep the best players. That was the lesson I had learned from the first 30 years of Oilers hockey, is you're going to lose Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, Yari Curry, Doug Weight, Curtis Joseph, and on and on, Paul Coffey, and on and on and on. Yeah, on and on and on. If this team isn't profitable, and even sometimes if it is, if you have the wrong owner, you're going to lose those players. So for me, like, and I also understand the need. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the arena debate. It was a big debate, and a very heated, extremely heated debate. Like, if people wonder why I block people, it was because of that. I was inundated with people who disagree with me, and it was so distracting. I had to insulate myself from it so I could at least just get on with my work. But and I know that Bruce probably had an opinion on it, but never once did I see him weigh in on those debates or express his opinion. He just and I don't know why that is, but it plays. It was he didn't engage in that debate, which I thought kind of showed his restraint. He sensed this is something that he didn't need to fight. Other people were fighting it. He wasn't going to add much. I think he felt, or he would have had an opinion, because he did have strong opinions on things where he thought he would add a lot. So he just backed out of that. And it's interesting because even in hockey is kind of a yes or no world in the end on players. Like, are you going to sign this player? Yes or no? And when I would talk to Bruce about it, some of these players, like at the end of the season, are they going to keep this guy? Are they going to keep that guy? To get him to say, okay, yes or no, I actually have to ask him directly, like they do in the House of Commons, yes or no. Do you think we should keep this player? And he even then, he just wanted to provide context. He didn't like to come down with the hammer on that kind of question. Go ahead, Kurt.
I'd like to add in on that point. As you guys probably know, my favorite thing that Bruce did were his 10-game segment reviews.
Absolutely.
I always thought those reviews were tragically underappreciated because I felt it was among his best work. And I read every period of those articles and loved them and told Bruce so. And looking back, God, I'm so glad I told him so. In fact, recently. But the one amazing thing, when you would come back to that little box right at the end of the article, where it would be, okay, here is the aggregate. Here's the average of the game grades over the last 10 games in order. So best at the top, worst at the bottom, and then a little comment on the side. And there was only enough of a box on the side to say one sentence about every player. And the thing that I always found remarkable about Bruce, and it speaks to your observation, David, is even in the player that was in the bottom box, he'd find something to say about them that wasn't divisive or rammy or shitty. At worst it would be, this veteran had a tough segment. Like it's as bad as it got, right? And I love that about him, because I think one thing that he and I shared was an appreciation that it's damn hard to get to the NHL, and there's no bad players in this league. And there's hundreds and thousands of others that never made it that far, included. And I always felt he had a respect for that showed up in his work, that I really liked.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement for sure. If anything, he was a consummate fence sitter in that his ability to find reasonable amongst the passion, I think, was pretty much unrivaled.
Consummate fence sitter. Bruce the Fair, Gentleman Bruce. All right. I'll say one more point about his, fairness, accuracy, and balance, because we worked on this Grade A Shots project together. And so I had been doing it for some time before both Jonathan and Bruce joined in. And to me, that's when it really took off. And and as the years went on, Bruce and I started to do it actually in real time. Like, I was always doing it in real time during the game, but Bruce started to join in during the game, and we would go back and forth with discussions. And it's an interesting project because I do think it comes out of, we want it to be fair to the players, and we are rating them. We are judging them. The players are under a microscope. They are under such intense scrutiny. This added to that, of course, that this kind of assessment adds to that. But I think the reason both he and I put so much time and effort into it is I just want, and he wanted to be, if we're going to rate players on numbers, it was very important for those numbers, for me, that they're fair and accurate. So again, if you ever, no hockey players ever sued anyone for commentary, but if you did go to court, well, at least Bruce and I could pull out our records and say, well, here on this night, Your Honor, this player at this time of the game made this particular mistake, and he repeated that mistake on this night, and this. We could prove our point. We had done the work. It became more than that. It becomes a way of seeing the game, going over video reviews, and hardly anyone knows what I'm talking about, because most people don't do this. But if you do it repetitively on every single shot, you do start to understand the game in a way that you didn't prior. Seeing how things are interrelated, how one player's mistake leads to another mistake, how often the first mistake, for instance, is the most catastrophic one because it sets off a chain reaction. All kinds of kind of understanding about hockey come from this way of seeing. People would say often to us, well, you obviously didn't see the game I saw. And I would say, yeah, we didn't. We didn't. You are right. You are right. We're seeing it in a different way. Bruce really came to appreciate that, to the point where both of us felt like if you didn't have that kind of analysis, it was really hard in a way to rate the game. I would struggle with it. I know when I watch a game and I don't do that kind of work, that I don't feel like I've watched the game at all, not in any way that I would feel comfortable commenting on it. Bruce felt the same way. And the first night when he wasn't there, it's only been 2 games now, I just felt lonely as hell. Like,
my observation on the Grade A work that Bruce and David did together, because to be transparent, I was very much arm's length from that project, not because I didn't believe in it, but because those guys had a system and they didn't need me in there gumming up the works. But as close as I was, I think that project was a great illustration, guys, about Bruce's objectivity. Because I would see the comments going back and forth on individual plays sometimes, and his objectivity shone through. There was never, oh, that's Leon, he's lazy, so let's mark it. That's never the way he commented on it. It was always very fair and analytical and objective. And I think Bruce really led a credibility to that data with those traits that he brought to the project.
You actually bring up a good point. Leon, I think, was his favorite player on the team. I don't think there's a lot of doubt about that. He's got a Leon jersey. He's got a Nuge jersey. We could debate about, but I think Leon, just from his play style, was my dad's favorite player.
Yeah.
And yet he was objective enough that he was able to say, well, Leon made a mistake here. In fact, the very last exchange that we had on Twitter, because I was in Vegas at the time that my dad became ill, was me sending a tweet to him basically saying, well, Leon made a mistake. And, I'm not sure he ever replied to that. I know he saw it, and I know that he would have said, yep, that's, that's just not good enough from Leon. And he could have been a fan of a player, but he would absolutely not hesitate to give criticism where it was due. He was so objective in that regard, right? Yeah, just fair. Fair is the best word to describe him.
Bruce the Fair. All right. Anything else, guys? Anything else we want to go over, Kevin? What about your dad as an astronomer? Because that's an area that I don't know much about. What was his fascination there? And how did you see it play out in his life?
Well, it started before my life. He was obsessed with the moon landings in the late 60s and early 70s, and the Apollo program in general. I think that's really what got him hooked. He had told me at some point many years ago that he had taken a break sort of from astronomy, and then in the mid 80s something reignited that again, and I don't recall exactly what that was. But he joined the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada's Edmonton branch, and he started volunteering at the Public Observatory at the time, the Edmonton Space and Science Center, which became the Odysseum, which is now the TELUS World of Science Edmonton. And he spent thousands of hours. It's got to be thousands of hours, either working for them professionally or volunteering there in a public education manner. He spent a great deal of time observing meteors. He would go, Leonids, Perseids, whatever. He would go out into that we have a spot that we would frequent out in the out by Elk Island at Blackfoot. That was dark sky, didn't have real impediments from city lights, so you could see everything. We did that frequently together for years. Something that I remember in somewhat great detail. But he was an observer with the same level of detail and objectivity in observing that he was as a hockey analyst. I have a couple of examples of that. The first is he had one of his favorite objects to observe was the moon. He had a book, it was an atlas of the moon that described all of the individual craters and flats, and don't even begin to ask me to describe it in the level of detail that he was. But by the time he was done, he had observed every single object that is visible to the Earth, and i.e. not on the dark side of the moon. He spent a decade doing it, but every single thing is noted in that book of, when he observed it and some observations about it. I'm not sure if he ever recovered that book. It got misplaced when we moved from Edmonton to St. Albert, but I'm going to try and go out of my way to find it. But there's handwritten notes in this book of every single object and his observations of them. And that just goes to show the detail that he was willing to go for something that he was passionate about. The other thing was he was passionate about sharing that knowledge with the public. It didn't matter if it was eclipses, conjunctions, whatever. If there was some public event and the Edmonton Science Center needed him, he was there. He was at the observatory, either in front of, manning his own telescope, doing his own version of public education, or he would be in the observatory proper teaching people. And finding middle ground. Let me give you another example of finding middle ground. Every year he worked for a long time in the summers at the public observatory, and he would run a project every summer where he would learn one word from every foreign language that he could coming through the observatory. And there was a whiteboard in the observatory. And, each year it'd be like sun or moon or, eclipse or whatever. And he would ask people, what's your native language? And what is the word for this in your language? And he would get them to write it on the whiteboard. And by the end of the summer, there would be, more than 100 examples of how you say this in each individual language. And it was a way that he was able to bridge, to connect with people, to learn something from them, and in exchange, build trust with people. And it's such an underrated skill. His ability to connect with people is, I wish I had it in the same, in the same capacity that he did. It's not that I don't, he was gifted at it in the same way that he was gifted at numbers. And that the world is a worse place without it.
And we really saw it like in the, let's say from 2007 to 2012, there was a huge debate around 2015, huge debate about analytics in hockey.
Mm-hmm.
And people staked out different sides. Like there was the people who rejected it completely. There was the people who believed in some numbers. And then there was me who had my own project. And interestingly, and there was like unbelievably, this is maybe hard to believe, but unbelievably fierce debates about
Mm-hmm.
the validity of each way of seeing hockey and rating and ranking players. Incredibly hostile debates. And interestingly, that's Bruce found balance in that as well. He put value in all the numbers and in seeing the game and everything around it, every form of analysis. He took the best out of it and put weight in that. So that was an interesting quality.
Context was hugely important to him. Context was the most, his ability to recall context, even going back to, well before I was born, like his memory was incredible, like in a way that he had the most incredible memory. And I know that I'm the son and I'm biased and whatever, but like to watch people just be in awe as he would recall, specific moments. The most famous example I think he's talked about recently on the podcast would be the first time that the Oilers won the Stanley Cup, and enjoying the process of building a team that's capable of winning the cup, and then enjoying that success when it happens, and understanding that it's not going to be perfect all the way, right? Like it is a process, and hating on the team that we cheer for collectively does little to help that process. There's one of the biggest things that he sort of talked about was, at least privately, was we have a sort of habit in this market of driving people out through negative critique, whether that's via the media, via public comment, via whatever, right? It's an extremely hard market for players to play in, especially high caliber players, because they're held to a borderline impossible standard, right? Did Gretzky make mistakes? Oh, hell yeah, he did. Did Does Draisaitl make mistakes? Does McDavid make mistakes? Absolutely. But kicking those guys when they make a mistake, or kicking the lesser players, that I think it's more extreme in the lesser players. Like, yeah, we have players that are gone from the team now. You have your Puljujarvis, your Jeff Petries, guys that were completely vilified. And my dad's approach to those types of players would have been completely different than most everybody else's. He would have called a spade, but he would have also granted positive energy when it was due. And it's something that I hope more people could find the time for. We live in a divisive time, and I think that honestly stressed him more than just about anything else. He wanted to find the middle ground and work with people to make things better rather than tear them down.
And we live in a time where for the first time, we know everybody's opinion all the time, and
Yeah.
it's very annoying and frustrating and divisive. But it is what it is. And I think we're all kind of learning to deal with this new world. Sometimes, often by tuning it out, placing less value in it than because the printed word was so powerful in the past, because it was so much more limited. There were so many fewer words out there, just in the newspaper or just on TV. There was just a few platforms. Now it's just increased exponentially, the amount of words, platforms, opinions, and it's unsettling. So it's hard to figure out what to do with that. I just wanted the point I was thinking of with stats is even good old goals plus minus. Everyone roundly rejected by almost everybody in the statistical community except for Bruce. Bruce still even liked the good old fashioned Roth Irvin plus minus developed by a tie salesman. I think it's Alan Roth in the late 1940s for the Montreal Canadiens, with Dick Irvin as the coach, and adopted by the NHL soon after that. He still put weight in that and still rated players on that. So he would find the good in every single statistic, and he honored that statistic too, I think, in part because of its tradition. I mean, and it should be honored. It was the first one of the first real stabs at serious analytics in hockey that went beyond goals, assists, and games played. It was a huge conceptual leap forward, and it's actually still the conceptual model that all of the new stats, Corsi, Fenwick, even X goals rely upon, is rating individual players by their play while they're on the ice with all these other players. It's still the conceptual model that's used. I have critiques of that model, but it should be honored. It shouldn't be shat upon necessarily. And Bruce always realized that, and intuitively knew that, and often referenced plus minus. So,
and
why don't we move on to numbers? Go ahead, Kevin. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that he viewed plus minus as I do believe he viewed that plus minus was a flawed model. And yes. the only reason I say that is because, like all things Bruce McCurdy, context was important. So sure, you could have a player that's -2, but both of those are because player X stepped on the ice because of a crap line change from whoever.
Yeah.
And the puck's going in the net just as he steps his foot on the ice, and he catches the minus for that, right? The context to plus minus is hugely important. And context, again, in Bruce McCurdy's world, was one of the most important things.
The most important thing. Numbers. I'll start out the numbers section with we did this game grading. We've done it forever. And we all have our own way of ordering the players. Kurt and I do it essentially the same way with a little bit of a difference. But I do first I put all the forwards and I put them in their lines. I first line, second line, and then the defense pairings, first pairing, second pairing, and then I end up with the goalie. Kurt's goes with the top unit. He does it in units. Top unit, second unit, third unit, And yeah, I think you start with the goalie most often.
Yes.
You start with the goalie. So again, Bruce didn't do it that way. He did it by the numbers of the players. So it would always start with number. I don't think we've had a number one goalie, like goalie who wore number one, but always number two, Evan Bouchard. Then like from there to number 97, McDavid, or number 98, Podkolzin, and whoever that was. And it honestly never made sense to me to do it that way. But it was intriguing that Bruce did that, because it did leave out what I thought was context of who was on that line that night. You could go back a month later and see who was on the line. But Bruce, it was the number order was more important. His fascination with numbers was so strong that he wanted to do it that way. He needed to order it that way. For him, that was the important thing, to get those numbers in order in that way. I never understood it. Maybe, Kevin, you can shed some light.
I have an educated guess, and I've never actually spoken with him about that directly, but if I had to guess, he viewed the game grading project as an individual grade for the players without the context, generally speaking, of the line's overall contribution. So when you look at Evan Bouchard, you look at Evan Bouchard, and then a few comments, both positive and negative, and then a stat line for that player, whether it was plus, minus, shots, blocks, whatever, right? I've taken some of that to my own writing. That was a reflection of the individual player without a lot of context of the players around them, unless there was some, extreme positive or extreme negative that needed to be contextually added. So to him, it was about ordering players numerically as they appear on the game sheet. And game sheets were his bread and butter. I remember we used to go to.
That's it.
We used to go to. That's exactly it, actually.
Yeah, that's it.
That's game sheet. My epiphany was just that. We used to go to the Oilers games. We would get free tickets occasionally, even going back to when I was a child. And Bo LeDrew was the video goal judge for the Edmonton Oilers, and he was a friend of my father's. And at the intermission, he would bring down the game sheets, in the pre-internet era, between periods, while we shot the shit at, the media entrance to go up into the catwalk at the Coliseum. And my dad would take his game sheets and be happier than
pig and game sheet.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. He loved the numbers aspect of it. And that I think that he used game sheets for years. And it's something that I use because he used it. The NHL stats aren't perfect, not even close.
No.
But on a game sheet, which is the record of the game, the players are represented from lowest number to highest number with no regard for who they're playing with. And I think that that's why he probably did what he did with the game grades.
Yeah, tradition and the way they did it, and just not overstating the importance of the grade. Like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And it is without the context of line mates. Yeah. We figured it out, gentlemen. Good work.
It's a scientific method for him, right? Like, it was consistency. I bet you if you looked at every game post he's ever written, it's in the same, the grade post, it's in the same format. So you could go back and you could iteratively go through everything he's ever written, and it would be, aside from scratches, injuries, whatever, functionally identical from one game to the next. And that, that scientific method was a big part of who he was.
Numbers. Any other numbers?
Yeah. November 22nd, 2003. The Heritage Classic. And I bring this up because it was one of the pinnacle games that I've ever attended in my life. It was one of those father-son experiences that you don't ever get to repeat. And I'll explain that for a few reasons. But the important piece is the day before, we didn't have tickets to the Heritage Classic. And as you can imagine, those were unobtainium because it was going to be everybody's last chance to see Gretzky. So he managed, well, there was a contest on, I think it was CBC. Don't quote me on that because my memory is not as good as my father's. That whoever could present the oldest Edmonton Oilers ticket stub would get tickets to the Heritage Classic. And my father, being my father, went and rooted around in his ticket box, which he had organized by season, because he was a season ticket holder from the very first game. So you could probably see where this is going. Until he stopped being a ticket holder. He had ticket stubs for basically every concert and hockey game and whatever that he ever went to. He actually was just recently going through those before he died, but I digress. He went and he found season 1, ticket 1, game 1 of the Edmonton Oilers.
From the NHL here. This is from the NHL.
From the NHL. First, 1979, game 1. There's no earlier ticket. It wasn't possible. So he sent this ticket stub in, or proved that he had it, and somebody else had the same ticket stub. So the tiebreak was to come into the studio, which I think was actually being held at City Hall, because I think they had the Hall of Fame there on a temporary basis. Like they had the cup and they had all the trophies and the selection of important items, and they were going to have a trivia off between the two people, my dad and this other individual, to see who knew more Oilers trivia. And so my dad was feeling pretty good about this, for obvious reasons. So we went to this studio, which was, a live audience, and they asked a bunch of trivia questions, and it ended up in a tiebreak. And the reason it ended up in a tiebreak is my dad's post-1993 Oilers knowledge was not as sharp as it was, from the 80s. And we finally got into a tiebreaker question, and the other person answered incorrectly. And my dad got a question that was deeply rooted in his knowledge of the 80s, and he was able to successfully answer it. And we won the tickets, which, as what was I, maybe 15 at the time, some 14, something like that. I was happier than a pig in shit, because at the, Gretzky was my hero. That's a story for another time. But Gretzky was my hero, and I wanted to go to this game. And so we won these tickets. He won the tickets. He was extremely happy. He offered the ticket to my mom. My mom, being my mom, said, "No, take Kevin." And we went to this game. But first, we went and saw the Hall of Fame together, or the limited Hall of Fame, such as it was. And we went to what is now my favorite noodle house, and he introduced me in that day to my favorite Vietnamese restaurant in the city. And then the following day, we went to the Heritage Classic. It was like minus 5,000 out. You could have frozen a bottle of water in about 60 seconds. Didn't matter. No, but like everybody came with cold weather gear. I don't think anybody was truly cold because the entertainment was exceptional. And my dad spoke of that game for years and years and years and years afterwards. And to me, as through my teenage years, it was one of those memories or sequences of events that's just truly etched into your mind. I remember them announcing Gretzky and just, 60,000 people being on their feet, just screaming at the top of their lungs as he walked out. And, you don't get to artificially make memories like that. That's so like wholesome and true to who you are as a person. And I would never give up that experience with my dad for anything.
Yeah, that is the cult of hockey.
Yep.
Pretty hard to top that story, hey Dave.
Yeah, you got any numbers there, Kurt?
To be transparent, I don't really, but something he just mentioned, Kevin just mentioned, I'd like to bring up, and it was the first time I met Bruce, and it was at Rexall Place, and it wasn't my son's very first Oilers game, but it was among the first few that I took him to, and he had a Ryan Smith jersey on, and he had met Sean Horkoff that day at some promotional thing and got a puck with the number 10 on it from Horkoff. And so we were up in the stands, and I wasn't with the Cult of Hockey yet. I was writing for another entity in town. And somehow I got word that Bruce was at the game, who of course I knew from the Cult of Hockey. And he immediately said, well, I'm down on level, whatever it is. I don't remember the level. He would have and said
he would remember down to the seat.
He would, right? He said, do you know where the Starbucks is on level XYZ? And I said, actually, yeah, I do. So my son and I went down, and that's the time, Kevin, that we met your dad for the very first time. And predictably, the first thing he did was not shake my hand, but shake my son's. and made a big deal over his Ryan Smith jersey. And of course, my son just beamed. I can close my eyes and picture this event as if it was yesterday, and just treated my son like he was the only person in the room. And there was 17,000 of us there. But then
that's my dad.
Yeah, right. But then I discovered that your dad and I shared a love of the WHA. And I'd shared how I'd had two cousins who played in the NHL, but they had played with a bunch of players that were in the WHA who I knew. Terry Ruskowski, John Mignall, Kelly Pratt, names that some hardcore WHA hockey fans will know and others won't, but your dad did. And all of a sudden I got to, tell him stories about how I'd go to hockey school and Terry Ruskowski would tie my skates because I couldn't yet. and we just regaled in all these fabulous WHA stories. And then we finished our coffees, and Brandon and I went back up to our seats and watched the rest of the game. But there were the two things that stuck. One, treated my son like he was the only person in the rink. And two, we could have talked all night about various players in the WHA and who we knew and who we admired and who we didn't. and up until very recently, your dad and I would often share WHA stories. And I always thought of your dad as the unofficial historian at the Cult of Hockey. He just had a vault of a memory for that stuff, which I had immenent respect for. Partly because it was just amazing how he could compartmentalize all that stuff, but also it was just fun. He was a great storyteller, and he had the ability to leave a smile on your face. I just wanted to relate that story too, because obviously my son and I are still Oilers fans today, and Brandon was very sorry to hear about your dad's passing and sends along his condolences. But it reminded me of that day when Brandon and I met Bruce for the very first time at Rexall Place. So,
I wonder if he had any. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say he was a storyteller. That was, if you wanted another word to describe my father, it was a storyteller. He had an innate ability to tell stories in interesting and engaging ways, to the point that I probably heard some of the stories several times, but I know a whole bunch of people have said, you know, I've heard your dad tell stories and I could listen to them over and over and over again, even if they're repeats, just because his way of storytelling is so interesting. I think Alan Lowtide said that to me, actually, now that I think about it. And um, yeah, the storytelling is such an important capability. I have one more comment about your son, actually, and that is that uh, there's a very good chance, especially if he had a puck, that your dad or my dad identified with him because I was a lover of hockey pucks, a collector of hockey pucks for a long, long time. Whether it was at, you know, the University of Alberta and Claire Drake, or whether it was um, at the Oilers, I had probably for a long time, and this collection has long since dispersed itself, but hundreds of hockey pucks at any is my favorite, one of my favorite things to collect. But I'm sure he would have connected with your son just over that aspect alone.
The point I was going to make about the WHA is I wonder if Bruce had WHA tickets and if that would have counted
Yep.
in that
No,
competition.
I think the explicit thing was first NHL ticket or oldest NHL ticket. But
Okay.
yeah, he was an avid fan of the WHA version of the Oilers prior to its merger with the NHL. And I think Kurt is bang on. Like, the man was a walking encyclopedia. Like, and with the ability to recall from that database of information at will. I think in his later years that it wasn't quite as sharp for newer events, but for that period from the, you know, mid 70s until at least the time that he ceased to be a season ticket holder in 1993, you would be hard pressed to find somebody that could outmatch my father's knowledge of the sport with relation to the Oilers.
Any other numbers?
Just that I would mention in passing that my dad was obsessed with sequences of numbers, as we've seen, and his ability to pull numbers out of a sequence that were relevant to what he was doing. In a mathematics point of view, he loved the Fibonacci sequence. He was able to find representations of the Fibonacci sequence. For those that don't know, it's the sequence of numbers where the next number is the addition of the previous two numbers. So the sequence, you know, in basic terms is 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so on and so forth. And he found representations of this in nature, whether it was flower petals, whether it was like just stuff that you would blow the average person's mind. But fractals and in this case number sequences were something that he was deeply attached to as a person. He was a nature guy. He went for walks every single day. Throughout St. Albert in the later years of his life, or wherever he was, if he was in Red Deer visiting my grandmother with my mom, then he would be, you know, walking there. But the appreciation for all animals and all things life was unmatched. We would frequently get pictures of rabbits and birds, and one of the last pictures I got of him was he had a woodpecker that landed on his finger. He managed to figure out how to get birds to land on his finger, and I have this picture in my text history, and it's just like that connection. And he was a lover of dogs and cats too, and you know, I have several of both, and he is he never met a dog or a cat or an animal that he didn't like. And it goes to show just how much of a pure character he was. He wanted the world to be good, and he contributed to that good, whether it was by teaching me those or by how he conducted himself. That's who he was. And he felt that nature was the purest iteration of good.
You know what, gentlemen? I think we're going to leave this podcast there. I want to thank both of you for talking today about Bruce. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
And in the meantime, and in between time, and until we meet again, Bruce McCurdy, who's now having a drink in the halls of our fathers with the Hockey Lords. This has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.
Never in doubt.
Never in doubt.